can hear. Everybody says sounds good. Very good. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started, and I'll introduce my friend and colleague, Tim Smith. He's with us tonight, the historian and collections manager at the Adams County Historical Society. I'm Andrew Dalton, the executive director. If you're new to ACHS, we are the County Historical Society in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We preserve over 1 million historic items from all eras of history back to dinosaur footprints, all the way up through the Eisenhowers and even beyond that. We also put on programs for the community, lectures, book signings, panel discussions. Right now, we're pretty much entirely on the web due to COVID-19. I did also want to give a shout out to the Adams County Community Foundation. They provided us with a grant to help purchase some supplies that will hopefully make our broadcasts even more smooth going forward. I also want to encourage you, if you have a chance, to hit the donate button on the bottom of our post tonight. It's very helpful, of course, to help us with all the work that we do to keep all these historic items preserved, put on programs, and help people do research on the community. We're also working hard on plans for a new facility for the Adams County Historical Society. You can stay tuned to hear more about that later this year. So now, I don't know if I introduced Tim yet, but Tim is going to be giving the program tonight on James Gettys, the founder of Gettysburg. And I'm going to attempt to bring up his presentation here. We're a little caught off guard because of the internet. Like I said, we've had a few problems with the internet tonight. Let's see. Okay.
So it's interesting that the lightning hit about 7 p.m. right as the program was going to hit. And it didn't knock me off, but it knocked our program out. So I'm curious if I was just sitting there looking at the computer for, like 5 minutes, maybe people saw me on the screen. I should also mention, while we're getting the program up, the program went down, Andrew. But while we're getting the program up there, that I am interested in dinosaur footprints. And I'm hoping that here in the next few weeks, we might do a program on the dinosaur footprints that were discovered in Adams County in 1936, or it's 1937. I'm very, very much into that. So that might be one of our upcoming topics. So tonight we're going to talk about James Gettys, or James Getty, however you want to, look how we left the S off of the program. How did that happen? So James Gettys is the founder of our town. And, a lot of people know that because it's called Gettysburg. I should mention right here, starting, that he has descendants, family members, great grandchildren today that live, all over the country. And his son had moved to Tennessee and had quite a number of children. James Gettys also has a brother, William, that moved to North Carolina, and he has descendants that are still around today in North Carolina. And I have spoken to members of the Geddes family from Tennessee and from North Carolina, and you can bet you the first thing I asked them is, how do you pronounce your name? And they all agree, Gettys. So since their name is Gettys and they pronounce their name Gettys, we should call it Gettysburg and not Gettysburg.
It's a very controversial statement, Tim.
It is. It's very controversial within our local community structure, but I think it's kind of neat to understand that. So, at least from the Gettys perspective, and don't worry, several times in this program, I'm going to call it Gettysburg. So, what you can only do what we can do. So, the Geddes family were part of the original European immigration into this area from Eastern Pennsylvania. They were one of the Scotch-Irish families that came into this area in the 1730s and early 1740s from Eastern Pennsylvania. And they formed, about 150 families formed what we call the Marsh Creek settlement. Let's go to the next one. This is that 1770 map. We showed a few times in our different programs because it's so nice when we talk about this area. And you can see on this map the early names of the townships in the western area of York County at that time. And you can also see some of the churches, including what they call Presbyterian temples. Let's go to the next one. And on this, you can see I have circled the upper Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church. And that's the one that the Geddes family attended. Of course, there's Lower Marsh Creek, there's Great Conewaga Presbyterian Church, and there's the Associate Reformed Presbytery, the Rock Creek Church. Let's go to the next slide. We don't have an early image of the church that would have been near the intersection of the Belmont Road and Mummersburg Road, northwest of Gettysburg. But we do have, of course, the 1781 church, the Great Conewaga Presbyterian Church, still stands, and the Lower Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church, made of stone, looks very similar. But these churches that predated the churches would have been made out of log in the 1740s. Of course, cemeteries still exist where these churches, these early churches once stood. And of course, the Lower Marsh Creek Presbyterian Cemetery is at the end of Byers Road. And many of you listening tonight probably were part of the group that toured that cemetery last year, a tour sponsored by the Adams County Historical Society. A lot of these early cemeteries are known for their cemetery art, and some of the oldest tombstones in our county are part of the Scotch-Irish Presbyterian settlers that came here in the early 1730s and 40s. Here is James Ross, buried at Great Conewaga Presbyterian Church, died in 1741. So it's one of the oldest stones in our county, although we have a few that date from the 1730s. You might notice on his grave, there is a hand and a sword. And of course, this appears on many of the early Scotch-Irish Presbyterian tombstones in our county. Let's see the next slide. And you can find it on a McPherson grave in Evergreen Cemetery that had been moved over from probably Upper Marsh Creek, or sometimes it's called Black's Cemetery. And Thomas Boyd's stone here from Black Cemetery. And one of the popular motifs on the Scotch-Irish stones is the hand holding the sword. And of course, it's referred to as the Red Hand of Ulster. Let's go to the next slide. And the story, which is based on sort of an Irish folklore, says a lot about the type of people that the Scotch-Irish settlers, a lot about the metal that they were made of. Basically, the story goes like this. Now, I should preface it by saying that the story is not true. So it really doesn't matter how I tell the story. And there are many versions of the story that you can find, some where they give the names of the families involved. But basically, there were two families that were feuding over a piece of land in Northern Ireland. And the families decided that instead of coming to blows or there being an armed conflict, they would settle the matter by each family presenting the representative of their clan who was the bravest and the strongest. And those two competed in a series of contests. And the last contest was where they row a boat across a body of water. In some versions, it's a pond or a lake. In some versions, it's part of the North Sea. But as they were approaching shore, whoever touched shore first, that family would be deemed the winner and they would receive the land that was in contention. And as the two approached the shore, one family, their representative was way ahead, and it was obvious he was going to win. But the man who was losing knew that he could not let his family down. So at the last moment, he pulled out his sword, he cut off his hand, and he threw his hand ashore ahead of the other family's representative, and he touched land first. And of course, the moral of the story is that this man cared about his family and his people so much that he was willing to sacrifice his hand for the better of his family. And of course, in time of war, the Scotch-Irish are ready to lay down their lives for their principles. So it's a dramatic, statement, and it appears on many of these early Scotch-Irish tombstones. Imagine this group of people coming into the backwoods of Pennsylvania and trying to settle this area when, there are problems with Native Americans from Western Pennsylvania coming in and settlers from Maryland trying to claim the land for themselves, and just the rigors and the hardship at the frontier itself. Now, this area that we live in is all part of the Manor of Mask. And basically, the Penn family, when they were given the state of Pennsylvania, the land grant, were also issued with the ability to set aside certain areas of land for their own personal usage. And in 1741, they tried to set aside a piece of land in this area, but the Scotch-Irish settlers would have none of that. And when people were sent out to survey this piece of land, they were beat up and sent away. It was known as the Marsh Creek Resistance. And it would take about 20 years to resolve this issue. But in 1765, it was resolved, and the Penn family was able to lay out the land. But they agreed that if the piece of land had been settled by 1741, that that land would be sold on common terms to the people who already lived there. And so there was a list created in 1765 called the Agnew-McPherson list. And on that list, Samuel Gettys appears. Now, it says that the piece of land he settled on was settled by 1741. And this fact has led many people to believe that the Geddes family lived here by 1741. But it doesn't appear that that is so. The list is actually a list of land that had been settled by 1741, and not necessarily by the people who had been on the document in 1765. We're not sure exactly when Samuel Gettys first came into the area, but he was definitely here by 1757. He buys a piece of land by 1760. And in 1761, he is operating an illegal tavern along the York-Nichols Gap Road.
Just wanted to stop for a second and thank Peggy and Jim and a couple others for their donations tonight. We really appreciate anything that you're able to give. Every little bit helps. I just wanted to kind of make a point that Tim hit on a little bit. When we talk about a settlement, a lot of people think we're talking about a town or a cluster of houses, but really these settlements, like the Marsh Creek settlement in the Manor of Mask, are spread out, and there's people everywhere, over a large area of forests and cleared land that the settlers had been creating. Could you talk, Tim, just real quick about where the boundaries of the Manor of Mask are and where Gettysburg falls within?
Well, today, Gettysburg is right in the middle of what would be the Manor of Mask. It's about 45,000 square acres of land. The interesting thing is that it's not surveyed until 1765, 1766. So the settlers here don't really know the boundaries of it when they're fighting over it, and they don't know when it ends up being surveyed if their land is going to be in it or if their land is going to be out of it. The good thing for us is the Manor of Mask survey actually created a lot of paperwork. And today, that paperwork is what we use to determine where some of the early settlers may have lived. So Samuel Gettys is part of this group of settlers in 1765, and he actually has his property surveyed in 1765. He asked for 250 acres of land on his warrant, but when it came time to survey it, there was more land available than he had thought, and he actually received a survey for 381 acres of land. And this is a copy of the original survey that we have in our collection. And you can see through the bottom of his property is the Marsh Creek Road, which is basically, Route 30 going through the center of the town. Now, also in our collections, we have the Holland Family Bible, which is a Bible that basically is for, you can see, I think it's dated 1810 there. It's for some grandchildren of Samuel Gettys, but in the Bible are the birth dates of Samuel Gettys's children. And this is very important for us. Let's go to the next one for our story, because we probably wouldn't know all the children that he had or the dates of their birth if it wasn't for this document. And in the middle of it, you might see of the page, it says James and Ann Gettys with an A. And that's, again, we said it's Gettysburg, and sometimes you see it spelled with an A, Gettys, or sometimes Geddes, Gettys. So, again, Gettysburg. But it says James and Ann Gettys, born August 14th in this 1759. In another Bible, they're actually listed as being born on August 4th. So there's some speculation about the correct age, whether it's August 14th or August 4th. But James was a twin. He actually had a twin sister named Anne. Let's go to the next one. And I don't want to get into too much detail. We love to get into meaningless detail on these Zooms. But Samuel Gettys, Samuel had 8 children. And you see the 8 children listed here. And I got this out of one of the better genealogies created by members of the family of William, which is James's older brother. And you can see there's a Mary who ends up marrying a John Lynn, I believe, the son of John Lynn. Some of you might know that the original name for Big Round Top on the 1765 survey, the Manor of Mask, is John Lynn's Hill. So, John Lynn, and they moved away, and you can see they died in Perry County. Then we have Elizabeth, who actually married John Fleming. And Fleming and Gettys were partners in a mill along Rock Creek for many years. And then we have William, who ends up moving to North Carolina and has many children in North Carolina, and they're still descendants of that family living there today. And then we have James, of course, who's the subject of our discussion, who dies in 1815, born in 1759, buried in Evergreen Cemetery. And we have his twin sister, Anne, who is referred to in some early documents. We're not sure exactly when she died, but undoubtedly sometime after 1815. Oh, I mention at this point that James Gettys will eventually marry Mary Todd, who's a daughter of a guy named Robert Todd. And then let's see, number 6 on this list is a young boy named John, who dies in 1777, and we're not exactly sure why he died. He died young, about 15 years of age. And then there's a young Isabella. You might know that James Gettys's mother is named Isabella Ramsey. So this is a girl named after her. And we don't know much about her. She dies in 1793, married a guy named Moore. And then there's a girl named Martha, who was born in 1768. And again, she died in 1815. And she married a guy named John Holland. And it was the Holland family who gave us the Bible that we have in our collection. Let's go to the next one.
First, I just wanted to cover 2 quick questions. Our friend Donnie Black, who's one of our top fans for the page, is asking, are there any stone markers for the corners or the boundaries of the Manor of Mask in these early tracts?
I do believe that there's no real stone marker. I do believe someone put up a marker to indicate the northwest corner, the northeast corner of the Manor of Mask. And several times people have told me about there being a marker established at that spot. But
Another
I've never been
question.
to the spot. It's landlocked. There are some stone walls that run along the property boundaries of the Manor of Mask that you can see, but they're later stone walls.
Another question. Any relation to Mary Todd, Lincoln's wife?
Well, you know, they say that that the Todds are all related. And so, you know, what this would be, let's say that the Todd, Robert Todd, let's say that his grandmother could have had another child, and that child, you know, the lineage could lead out towards Mary Todd Lincoln. I know that I was very surprised in one book written about the Gettysburg Address, and I think it was like a 1915 book. Surprised and stunned me when they made the statement in the book that Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address from the ancestral home of his wife's family. And I was like, wow, how did they come up with that? But no, I don't think anybody's been able to trace that unless the Todds have done research and they know how, you know, this and that person's really related, but I'm not aware of it. So, you know, undoubtedly, there was a tavern here owned by Samuel Gettys by 1761. Now, were they here as the early as the 1740s? We just don't know. We know the tavern was there by 1761 because, you know, he's fined for running an illegal tavern. And that tavern was later, the original was later rebuilt and then burned in a fire in 1880. This image here, we're not sure when it was recorded, but it's number 500. And the earliest I've seen it on a Tipton mount seems to me to indicate it's really early. I think some people have placed it in the 1870s, but it could be one of the 1867 Tyson Brothers, or C.J. Tyson, I should say, stereo series. So it was taken prior to 1880, maybe as early as 1867, but it shows the tavern. And I'd love to know the angle. The site of the tavern today is under the parking garage. And I'm sure if some of you keep up with our posts know that we've been working on the items that we received as part of a donation of an archaeological dig that was done at this site many years ago. And just during the COVID, we actually received more items from this archaeological dig, and we'll probably be posting more about the dig in upcoming weeks. But let's go to the next one. This tavern was a meeting house in the area. All the taverns that at that time were used as gathering places. Samuel also ran a store at this site, and you know, there was a tavern, and he had a license. You could drink, you could eat. It was a restaurant, and you can see in this document, which just explains that the collector of taxes is going to be there for several days at the house of Samuel Gettys. You can see written on there. Okay, let's go to the next one. Oh, I should also mention that, you know, in 1775, there was actually a gathering at the tavern. It's from the records of the York County Historical Society. Of course, this is York County at the time, where residents of Marsh Creek got together and formed a military company that joined Washington's army near Boston. This would have been just after the Battle of Bunker Hill. They had the British contained and trapped in the city of Boston there, and that's my city of Boston map on the right there in the slide. We don't know the names of the men that were involved in this company, except the officer in charge, Michael. You can see there, Doodle's company. But we do know men from this area served in that company. Now, I should mention, We do know that later, James Gettys, young James, actually by 1781, he actually is an officer in a company that was formed in Marsh Creek and actually served in the Revolutionary War Army. Oh, and now, we have references to where this thing that burned in 1880 stood, this tavern. And you can see that on the 1850 map and on the 1868, 1869 Warren map, there is some discrepancy about the angle that the building stood and the place the building occupied at the parking garage. So I still, to this day, am unclear about how the building was arranged in, the alley.
And according to the original surveys too, I mean, this and the Dobbin House, I believe, Tim, are the only structures within today, what is the borough of Gettysburg, that were standing prior to the town. And you can tell when you look at both of those structures, the Dobbin House and this tavern on the map, that they're both kind of crooked and they don't fit into how the town was laid out.
That's very common. If if a road is already been established, usually the building will be constructed so that the front of the building is facing the road, or it's exactly perpendicular to the road. And of course, this is not the case here.
Two great questions. One from our good friend Jane Nutter asking, did James and his family own slaves? And the answer is yes. And actually, at I think in a few slides, we're going to talk about the most famous enslaved individual in the Gettys family was Sidney Bryan, who was given to James by his father at the time of Samuel's death. And we'll talk about Sidney in a little bit. Another question, where is the monument that we showed on the previous slide located? And it's near the outside of the Racehorse Alley parking garage. So if you're at the Majestic Theater and you walk east, I guess, along Racehorse Alley, it's a small marker near that parking garage. And if you've been to Gettysburg, you'll know it is the only parking garage in Gettysburg. Anybody who's tried to park in downtown Gettysburg, I'm sure, is familiar with that.
And we should probably mention that statue used to be out in the middle of the parking lot that was there. There was a parking lot there when I was a kid, and the monument was out sort of away from the alley in the middle of the parking lot. And then when they built the parking garage, I believe in the 1980s, they actually moved the monument to its current location. And I think it was moved again. So I think it's been moved a couple times. But we have photographs of the dedication ceremony. Dr. Charles Gladfelter gave a speech at the dedication ceremony of that monument and that plaque, we should tell you. We have photographs from the ceremony. So, in 1769, the Baltimore-Shippensburg Road is laid out. We talked about this in our roads program. And you can see that we have a copy of the survey of the road. And it's interesting, on the left there, you can see it comes across Rock Creek near Samuel Gettys's mill. And then it comes up past Samuel Gettys's house, and it runs all the way. I don't know if I have it on the top part of the map. Yeah, it runs by the Presbyterian Church up on the top part of the map. It's hard to read there, but I think it might say that in there. Maybe it's just off of it. But I should point out that, the tavern is shown near the northeastern corner of that intersection that comes through the town. And exactly where the intersection was originally and where, we know it's not where the square is today, but exactly where it is, is somewhat come under debate. We have some documents that give a description of the course and distance of the road. It's just, did they really follow that? Of course, Samuel Gettys's on this map mill eventually became McAllister's mill. Now, originally it was a log mill when he ran it. And again, by the 1760s, he's obviously running a mill there. And then, eventually it becomes McAllister's mill. And I should mention, it was run by James Gettys and his brother-in-law, Fleming, for a while. Early on, people didn't understand exactly how this road came through the town. And J. William Long, who was a longtime volunteer of the Adams County Historical Society, drew this map of the town lots, the 116 acres of land we're going to talk about, and where the road came through. And you can kind of see how he did it here, but that's probably not right. This is one done by Elwood W. Christ, Woody. He loved to talk about the history of the town. He was actually involved in the archaeological dig that was done at the Geddes Tavern site before the parking garage was built. And on this map that he drew years ago, you can kind of see to the northeast corner of the intersection where he places the buildings. And it's kind of awkward. He has buildings at both configurations that we were just talking about. So I don't know if one's the barn and one's the house, but you can see where he kind of suggests that the road came through at that time. Let's go to the next one. And then, we have an aerial map of the town. And one of my good friends, Randy Miller, actually laid out the road as they came through the roads, the east, west, and north, south road. And he places the intersection kind of up where the bus terminal is, just a little bit north of the train station today. And he has the east-west road on the railroad, where the railroad bed is coming in, as Woody in his research had the east-west road in Racehorse Alley. And of course, since I was really close to Woody, but I'm really close to Randy, and I have to side with Randy, I think, in this particular instance. Let's go to the next one. So Samuel Gettys died in 1790, and his wife Isabella Ramsey Gettys, she died in 1815. I think the day after James Gettys died. But let's go to the next one. Oh, I should mention that they're buried in Black's Cemetery, which was the site of the original Upper Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church. That's no surprise. And it's believed that, their bodies are there. And in 1998, the descendants of, remember, William, who moved to North Carolina, his family put up this monument. Now, here's a 1798 survey of lands that were owned by Samuel Gettys, and they were divided up, and how they ended up being divided up and auctioned off. Now, Samuel ran into financial difficulty. Before everything came down on him and they sold all his property, he owed like 10,000 pounds. There are many people speculate about how he got into so much financial trouble. Some people have suggested that he sold supplies and goods to the Continental Army, and they were unable to pay him back, and it ended up in his bankruptcy. And others just say that he, gave out a bunch of loans or speculated continental currency when he shouldn't have. But in 1785, he was in debt, and they auctioned off his property. And slowly over the years, all his property was auctioned off. But in 1785, his son James purchased 116 acres of the original 381 acre tract. And then he had a surveyor lay out 210 town lots, and the town as we know it was formed. And you can see here in the 1798 survey how the 116 acres is kind of been sectioned off of the southern portion of his tract there. And of course, we have a document in our collection from 1785 that has the survey of the 116 acres of land. And you can see the east-west road, the York Road to Nichols Gap, and the north-south road, the Black's Gap Road, and how they come across this piece of land. Let's go to the next one. There's a good blow up of it. Also, you might have noticed on the last map we showed, it showed Reverend Mr. Dobbin, and it showed I think it showed William Bones as the property owner before him, and here it shows Dobbin. I kind of oriented this so that it is north-south, and you can kind of see where it is.
Right, now, and we should mention too that these roads kind of, are in the same vicinity of the Baltimore Pike coming north into Gettysburg, and then the Mummersburg Road north of town. You can tell if you're familiar with Gettysburg, there's a small strip of called Mummersburg Street that's still a remnant of this original road, one of the two that intersected near the tavern.
And we should further tell them that if they want to learn more about that, they have to go back and look at our roads program that we did a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
So James Gettys is a very enterprising man. And, you know, a lot of times people have given him all the credit. I have to think that his father, Samuel, had something to do with the laying out of the town also. His name's not on it. You know, James purchased the property from his father's, public sale. But there's every reason to believe that Samuel probably put his money and his weight behind James's purchasing of the land. And then they laid out a town around this intersection, and this town became wildly successful. They had a guy named John Forsyth lay out 210 town lots. Most of the lots are 60 feet wide and 180 feet deep. The ones that run along Baltimore Street and today's Carlisle Street are 60 feet wide and 142 feet deep. And the ones around the square are kind of an odd shape, but they offered them for sale. They had the interesting idea, and other people tried this also at the same time. They had a lottery. And basically what they did was they sold tickets, and they put the tickets in probably a big bin, and they circled them around, and they pulled out the ticket or the name on the ticket, and they assigned that name to a certain lot. And he probably said, okay, we're going to do lot number 1, and they pulled a name. Lot number 2, they pulled a name. And this way, it caused excitement. The person who won the lot was then given the option to buy that lot. We don't know the specific details of the auction. We don't know if they were given a certain amount of time, they had to make a down payment. We don't know how much the tickets cost, but we have the lottery map showing the people who won each lot. Now, the reason you want to be in this lottery is because you want to win a lot around the square. If you win a lot around the square and you have the option to buy, you can sell your option to buy to someone who wants to put a store in a new town, or a lawyer who wants his office next to the courthouse. So that everyone wants to win the best lots right around the center of the town on the main streets. And you don't want to win the ones on the back streets. Question?
We should also just point out, I think, too, that you can see that the Gettys family retained 7 or 8 lots. You were going to... And of course, people who are familiar with early Gettysburg history probably know, but the original courthouse in the town of Gettysburg was also on land that the Gettys family had kept, and that was the center of the town, what's called the square. It's the same exact spot that the square is located in today. And I'm sure Tim could explain this better, but over time, the circle, the square, the diamond, it was known by many different names. But that courthouse stood until just before the Civil War, when the current courthouse was built on Baltimore Street.
Yeah, I think we like to say that today we call it the square. At the time of the battle, they called it the diamond, but it's actually a circle. Now, I should point out that in James Gettys in 1786 had this map created on January 10th, 1786. He starts his ground rent. And so that's kind of the date we've used to establish the date of our town, because he has the first ground rent start on January 10th, 1786. And so the first ground rents are due the next year. He's not able to issue deeds for the lots in the town because he doesn't have the patent deed for the property. Samuel had gotten a warrant and a survey, but he never went through with and got the patent deed. So in 1787, he gets the patent deed, and then he's able to offer and give people their deeds. And on the earliest deeds, it calls the center of the town the diamond. And diamond is spelled wrong in all the early deeds, D-I-M-O-N-D. So I don't know if diamond, maybe it's some other word we're not sure about that's misspelled. Maybe it has a different meaning. No, I'm sure it doesn't.
Of course, we have the original map. I got to interrupt Tim because this is actually an artifact that we have in the collections of the Historical Society, and it is the original map on animal hide that we showed a tracing of on the past slide. It's encased in some archival materials to keep it safe, but and it is considerably faded, but it's an incredible document. It's actually a pretty large piece of animal hide. We're hoping to put that on display eventually at our new facility.
And it's fascinating that this map came to us. A donor purchased it at the Ellen Tipton Beeler auction. So obviously this map came through the Geddes family and who knows who else to William Tipton, the famous photographer, and then went to his granddaughter, and it was at the granddaughter's auction where someone bought it and then later donated to us. So we're very fortunate for that. I just wanted to mention that, he had to sell 210 tickets for each of the lots before he did it, but he probably didn't sell as many tickets as he wanted to because he obviously gave tickets away to his family members. His mother gets a ticket, his father gets a ticket, his uncle gets a ticket, his niece gets a ticket. His niece, who is 9 years old, is one of the lottery winners in the town. And, there's a lot of that going on. Oh, I should tell you, when you win the lot, you don't have to buy it. And that's another good thing about the lottery. Obviously, you had to pay money to get a ticket, unless you were his niece or nephew, then you probably just got a ticket. But these lots were assigned, but only about a third of the people who received the lot through the lottery actually went on to buy the property.
Just wanted to, we have a question here about whether or not Gettys knew that the town was going to be successful. I think obviously during this period, it was very customary for these town proprietors or people buying land to decide that they're going to establish a town at an intersection, and then they lay out all the lots. But maybe you could talk, and maybe you're going to in a few slides, just a little bit about how Gettys actually marketed that town and ended up getting it to be the county seat.
He is really good at what he does. I mean, I don't know that in the 1780s he could have anticipated it, but by 1790, when his town is established, there looks like there's going to be a movement for a county seat. So possibly by 1786, people were saying, hey, yeah, that we're going to have a county seat one day. We're going to break away from York County. And yes, this will be a county. And so in 1800, let's go to the next slide, see what that one is. We'll talk about that in a second. But so this shows York Street, and it shows Racehorse Alley where the parking garage is. And you can see that James Gettys did not sell lottery tickets for the lots where the parking garage is today, because that's where his tavern is sitting. And some of the front lots along York Street he saved because he built a new tavern out front along the New York Street, and that would be the Globe Inn. And this tavern, which started, it was James Gettys's tavern, and then it had successive owners, was probably built in 1796. It was one of the early brick structures in the county, and the first brick structure, in the borough, obviously. But I guess it burned in a fire in the 1960s. And today it's kind of like where, what's it called today, Andrew? Where Wogan's drugstore was. And, here's a photograph of it taken from I think it's a 1859 photograph, 1860. And it's from the window of the Tyson Brothers Photographic Studio. Actually, this photograph here, I should tell you, is William Frastinito. So this is his actual photographs, and he bought it many years ago at a local shop.
And we should point out too, the Globe Inn was a very successful and popular hotel during the Battle of Gettysburg. This is Tim mentioned, one of the earliest outdoor photographs taken in Adams County, one of the first taken in Gettysburg. The Globe Inn, we have civilian accounts from the young boy who was living there at the time, John Charles Will, And of course, right across the street is the David Wills house, just a little bit on diagonal, where Lincoln stayed, obviously, following the battle during his visit in November of 1863.
So we talked about the success of the town. Let me just hit on that a little bit. So in 1800, they do form Adams County out of the western townships of York County. And James Gettys wants to make sure that he gets the county seat. So he gets some investors who live in this area to put up money to defer the cost of the building of the county courthouse and the county jail. He gives land for the county courthouse and the county jail in the town, and he turns over his lot rents. Not only did he sell lots for about $10 each, there was $1 a year ground rent, and he said he would turn over those ground rents to the new county government. And he did this all because he knew that once it was a county seat, the value of his property would go up and he'd be able to make more money selling the lots that he still retained upon the county being formed. And he must have made out very well on this venture. Now, let's go to the next one. So the 210 town lots look something like this. I drew this little map with the squares in it. And then if we go to the next slide, you can kind of see I put an aerial map from the 1950s, the 210 town lots, and Randy Miller helped me trace out where exactly that 116 acre tract of land was that he purchased at his father's auction. And you can kind of see how the 210 town lots fit in. I think that's kind of cool. Let's go to the next one. And then, of course, from the time that he laid out the 210 town lots to the time it was the county seat to the incorporation of the borough, he added lots in the space that he owned west of the town, north of the town, east of the town, and along what would become South Baltimore Street. So he had additional lots. I think the additional lots have numbers, and the largest number I've seen is 256. Although when he died, a lot of these lots hadn't sold yet.
Somebody's asking, what is a perch? That's a very good question. Isn't it
But
16 feet?
A perch is a distance given in surveying, and if I'm not mistaken, a perch is like, what, 17 and a half feet. I'm not a surveyor, but it's the same. Isn't it the same as a rod? I don't know, but it's a measurement. It's a measurement of distance.
And people may wonder how, we calculated, especially where the road is going, and that it's from surveys. And so, you have to get a protractor and measure distances and angles and directions and trace the lines on these original documents. It can be really challenging.
And I'm here to say that every time I do it, I turn to Larry Boland of the Adams County Historical Society or Randy Miller, and I say, hey guys, do this for me. And they do it for me. So that's why I don't really know. So James Gettys died in 1815. His wife and his mother and his niece all died at the same time. I think maybe one of his sisters died too. So there was a fever that was running through the town at that time, and they all died. And he was originally buried in Black Cemetery, or the Upper Marsh Creek Presbyterian Cemetery. In 1865, following the Civil War, what was left of his remains were moved to the Evergreen Cemetery, and a nice stone was placed on his grave by his son. So James had a few children. He had a son, James Gettys Jr., that moved to Tennessee in 1826. He had another son, Robert, who died in 1827. So by 1830, there were no more Gettyses in Gettysburg. They had all moved away. Now, what's interesting, I should point out here that the North Carolina, William, that moved to North Carolina, he had grandsons in several North Carolina regiments. And someone did, in the family, did some research on it. And there's no doubt 2 or 3 of them, depending on their status, actually were involved in the fighting here. And I remember one of them, I forget which regiment, I believe in Scales Brigade, actually would have participated in the first day's battle and probably crossed the ground owned by his great-grandfather. Would he have known that? Would he have known that his grandfather was born in this area? Would he know that he was related to the town he was attacking? Their last name was not Gettys, however. It was a different name.
Our good friend Kurt Musselman's pointing out, who I believe does have a lot of training and experience with surveying, a perch is 16.5 feet. And also Kurt was asking why the Gettys descendants left Gettysburg.
Probably just for greener pastures,
Right.
No particular reason. So there's a great story about James Gettys's grave. And you can see it here in Evergreen Cemetery. You can visit it today. It says James Gettys, proprietor of Gettysburg. And you can see there's a cast iron dog at his grave, painted white here. And I think I actually have a blow up of it. And according to the story, and I should preface this by saying, some of you may have heard this story before. This story, I'm not exactly sure how old the version of the stories I'm going to tell you is, but it was definitely promoted by Colonel Jacob Sheeds, who was a longtime school teacher in Gettysburg and loved this story. And the part we know for a fact is that James Gettys was a collector of rare dogs. And in 1806, the town became an incorporated borough. Prior to that, even after it was the county seat, he had control of the town. But when it became an incorporated borough, he sort of lost control. There was a borough council. And one of the first rules they passed was a rule taxing dogs in the town. And, you know, every dog was taxed a certain amount, and every female dog was taxed a certain amount. I think it was 50 cents a dog and $2 for every female dog. And I think, according to the story, James Gettys is infuriated by this. So he put a tag on a collar on his dogs. And according to Colonel Sheeds, that tag used to be on the dog at the tombstone. And the tag said, "I am James Gettys's dog. Whose dog are you?" And according to Colonel Sheeds, someone stole the tag from the dog, so that, you know, I've never met anyone who actually saw the dog tag on it, but it's an awesome story. So if it isn't true, it should be, the story still should be told.
And for those of you who don't know, we're actually, in addition to being the Historical Society, we're really the county archives as well. There is no Adams County archives. So we have a lot of records from the Adams County Courthouse, some of them dating back to 1800, the very first courthouse. And we do have a lot of records of dog licenses that actually give the names of each dog and how much they were taxed for.
And while we're talking about, let's go back just a second. While we're talking about James Gettys's grave, I wanted to mention that it says General James Gettys. After the town was formed, James became the clerk. When the county was formed, he became the county treasurer for a while. He was the county sheriff, Adams County sheriff, from 1803 to 1806. And just a couple years ago, someone in the family donated to us, one of the Tennessee Gettyses donated to us the actual sheriff's book that he used from 1803 to 1806 with his notations in it. And it's particularly awesome. And also, he was a general, an officer in the local militia from early, after the Revolution up until the time of the War of 1812. And at the outbreak of the War of 1812, he was actually the general in charge of the militia of Adams County. So on his grave, it does say General James Gettys.
Somebody's asking where the dog is today.
Oh, the dog was stolen from Evergreen Cemetery. There was another cast iron dog very similar on the Staley family plot. And both dogs were stolen from the Evergreen Cemetery. And there is an exact duplicate of the dog in Frederick, Maryland, a cast iron dog in front of a residence. And we've talked a lot about trying to get a copy of their dog made and have it placed back in Evergreen Cemetery, but we haven't done that. So if there's a big donor who wants to donate money for the cast iron dog, feel free to contact us. And then I want to go ahead. Do you want to talk?
I'd love to talk about this. So we've researched pretty extensively a lot of the African-American families that lived in the town of Gettysburg. By the time of the Civil War, there's about 200 African-American residents in Gettysburg, probably another 100 at least living throughout the county. And actually during the Battle of Gettysburg, one of the older Black residents of Gettysburg is Sidney Bryan, or O'Brien, who was the slave of the Gettys family. She's actually listed in the will of James Gettys. And at some point she's freed, probably in the 1820s or 30s. By the 1840s, she owns a small house in the town of Gettysburg on South Washington Street. And you can see this is the 1850 map of Gettysburg. And Sidney Bryan's house was actually labeled. Today, it sits right in the middle of the road on South Washington, actually in Breckenridge Street, at the intersection with South Washington Street, right next to what is now the St. Paul's AME Zion Church. So we don't know a lot about Sidney and her life. She married into the Stanton family, another very prominent early Black family in Gettysburg. And we have actually records at the Historical Society given to us from descendants of the Stantons. Sidney's daughter was named Getty Ann Stanton. And it's always been said that there's probably some sort of familial blood tie between Sidney and the Gettys family, whether or not there were children born to one of the Gettys' sons. And it's something that we've always been curious about, and we're hoping at some point, this is Tim's very good idea, I think, would be to have a descendant from James Gettys and a descendant of Sidney Bryan take the DNA test that Ancestry.com provides to see if there is actually a familial connection between the two of them. But it has been talked about, and obviously Sidney's daughter was named Getty Ann Stanton. And we have a family Bible actually owned by Getty Ann at the Adams County Historical Society. One of the really rare items we have from a very early local Black family. And here's the map. Like I said, we don't have a lot of, unfortunately, details about Sidney's life, her experiences in Gettysburg. With Black history, it's often twice as hard to find information because there was so little in terms of record keeping. Especially in the days when slavery was prevalent in Pennsylvania. So it's obviously a very important angle to the story of James Gettys and the Gettys family. Anything else, Tim?
Here's something else I was going to say that, so Geddes Ann is born about 1821. And so she's Sidney O'Brien is probably the same age as James Gettys Jr. that moves to Tennessee in 1826. But here's another point. Samuel Gettys had a slave named Old Doll. And there's a possibility that Old Doll is the mother of Sidney O'Brien through James Gettys Sr. Because again, Sidney is listed in the will as a mulatto girl. And so these are very interesting questions that I think are worthy of more exploration. Let's go to the next one. And of course, I would feel neglected if we didn't tell this final story. If you visit James Gettys's grave today in Evergreen Cemetery, behind him, you'll see several graves of his family members, including a grave for his son, Robert, who died in 1827. And you can visit the grave and you can read it. And there's a poem on it that's one of my favorite, cemetery poems. And of course, I love to read it. Remember me as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so shalt thou be. Prepare for death and follow me. There's another verse to it if you feel inclined to read it. But you know, I think James Gettys left his mark on our town for the development and promotion of our county seat. And of course, this development of this road network actually led to the armies being sucked into this area and, you know, directly led to the battle that we're so fond of studying. And of course, you know, that battle, because it was fought in our town and completely surrounds our town, has kind of kept us a small community. And because of that, much of the original boundaries of the town and the town lots are still there today. So it's still, you know, the town resembles the way Gettys laid it out originally.
Thank you, Tim. And I did want to point out just one more time, we actually have a lot of artifacts from the dig that was done at the site of the Gettys Tavern. If you enjoyed the program tonight, I hope you'll consider hitting the donate button to help us preserve items just like those. Hundreds, probably thousands of individual artifacts in those, you know, I don't know, probably 20 or 30 boxes that we have. And we hope to put those on display so that folks can enjoy looking at them at some point in the not too distant future. Thanks again for joining us tonight for our live program. We'll be back next week. I'm not sure what the topic will be yet, but we will have it out to you at some point. Thanks again for supporting the Historical Society. I hope you'll take the opportunity to check out our website. It's www.achs-pa.org. I hope everyone stays healthy and safe, and we're excited to be with you again in about a week. Take care.